All right, so Laura, what are we making today?
I'm really excited. We are making apple fritters. And
I've just tossed up our recipe on screen.
perfect. I was just about to say, I went to glance over my shoulder to see if it was there. And so I'm going to ask Lacey if she will read it, since it's a little harder for me to see it on the screen here.
Of course. So we're making a recipe called apple fritters a second way. This is a recipe from an English cookbook by a gentleman named Richard Briggs, and was published not long after George Mason's death in 1798. But we have found several apple fritter recipes. They were all pretty similar. And I'm curious if there's anything that stands out for you as you're looking at this recipe on screen, or if you've had a chance to look at it from when you downloaded it prior to joining us. Feel free to pop in the chat if you have any thoughts or comments, or if you wish to unmute yourself and shout out loud, now's a great time to do that too. I love that it has Seville oranges down here. This is a kind of slightly bitter orange grown in Spain. That's one that stands out for me. We are not adding Seville oranges to our apple fritters today. They are shockingly expensive even today.
We have a lemon today, however, so we are still getting our citrus in there.
That is part of that recipe up there. There is a lemon peel in there. Anything standing out for anyone? Anything you're curious about this recipe? Oh, that it's got a glass of brandy. We found a few, Laura, didn't we, that had ale and cider in them, which I thought was really awesome and really different. And we decided not to go with those because this is a program in which we're encouraging kids and adults to participate together. So the brandy in this one is optional. And we thought that the ale and the cider might actually be part of the leavening or making it rise. So like we would add baking powder or yeast to something to make it rise, we thought that the ale and the cider might be doing that in the recipes. So we chose this one that had the glass of brandy, which won't be missed if you don't use it. Anything else from anyone else? Well, if you have any other thoughts about the recipe later or questions, feel free at any point to pop them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that for Laura, and I'll shout them out loud. There may be some moments where it's appropriate for you to shout your question out loud, and we'll let you know when that happens. All right, Laura, take it away.
Fantastic. So now that we've acquainted you with our historic recipe, we'll jump in with our modern interpretation of it. So I've got all my ingredients set out here. And
hey, Laura, I'm so sorry. You need to start that camera, please.
There we go. I'm so sorry. I thought I looked over. I thought, oh no, it's not there. So that's all right. So now that you all can see what's on my oven top here, my stove top, I have set out all the ingredients for today, as those of you who joined before know we tend to do. So I've got 2 apples, and like I held up, I've got a lemon for that. I have my flour set out already. It's a cup of flour. I have a 1/4 cup of powdered sugar. And we also have here our spice, and it's whole form and powdered. We've got nutmeg. But nutmeg is not the only spice you can use for this. If you decide that nutmeg is not your thing, you could also substitute in something like mace or cinnamon. And we've got, let me double check how much we have, 1 teaspoon of it. So I have more in my bowl than we need. We're also going to need cream.
It's the same.
So I've got our thing of cream here. We'll only need a cup of it.
I rather the crust.
We've got 1 egg. Oh, could I ask whoever's speaking to please mute themselves so that way it doesn't cover up me talking and everyone can hear. Thank you so much. We've got 1 egg. I've actually got brandy here. We decided this morning we would indulge a little bit and we would try it with the brandy. And then I have lard for our frying medium. So this is one lard that you can get at the grocery store, but if you don't want to use lard for any reason, you could also use something like oil. And in fact, a little later, we'll talk about frying in the 18th century. So to get us started here, I'm going to start paring or peeling my apples. And
So
I
are these a historic variety of apples, Laura?
So we want to use an apple that is really crisp and holds its body well. So we're using Gala today. And I admit I do not know much about the history of Gala apples. So Lacey, if you know more about Gala apples than me, please indulge us.
Sure. Yeah. So it's really, really hard to get historic apples today. Gala is not a historic apple. The historic apples that we're actually working on growing here at Gunston Hall, they won't be ready for 5 or 6 years at minimum, possibly as much as 10 before we start really getting apples in the garden. They have fun names like Hughes Crab and Roxbury Russet and Newtown Pippin. And there are places that grow them in heirloom capacities, but they aren't super widely available in the grocery store. So we're using a modern apple that approximates the texture of what was available in the 18th century. And when they were making this dish at this time of year in the 18th century, what did our apples look like, Laura?
I would say, to put it in a modern term, not so hot.
So they're kind of shriveled. They've lost some of their moisture. But this was one of the fruits that lasted the winter in the 18th century. It was something that would keep. It was something that they could add the vitamin C and the vitamin A to their diets, though of course they didn't know that in the 18th century. But it was getting some color and some different flavors on their plate that were otherwise not available.
And apples are great. And in fact, if you look at cookbooks and household management books, they talk about how do you keep apples all winter long, because you may have heard, phrases like one bad apple spoils the bunch. So we want to make sure that if you have a large stash of apples, that they don't go bad. And so one book, for instance, says, oh, you should barrel them in sand. So you will put them down in layers of sand, a layer of apples, a layer of sand, a layer of apples, and the sand is supposed to help prevent that moisture from building up and potentially causing rot in those apples.
And you'll see the same recommendations for things like carrots and potatoes and not so much cabbage, but cabbage was one that also survived the winter. What else, Laura? What are some of the other fruits and veg that lasted the winter in the 18th century?
Pears.
That's right.
If you get a hard-bodied pear can last a very long time, which is great.
Yeah. So again, these are not the modern varieties typically that we're talking about. I don't have the 18th century varieties in my head right at the moment, but you want a hard, relatively unripe pear to put up, not super, super ripe ones.
Same thing with peaches. If you get peaches just right, you can also get peaches to last a while.
But really, I didn't know that.
If you treat
something new every day.
If you treat them right, it's but peaches is a good example of something, and apples as well is that they recognize that under the right conditions, you get that to last a while without refrigeration. Right. But that's a really hard thing to do. So a lot of fruits, they go and they want to preserve them in more dependable ways. So you get a lot of pickling recipes. And today we tend to think of pickles strictly for things like cucumber. But in the historic context, they were pickling about anything and everything.
Anything you can think of, from meat to peas, they were pickling it all.
I've seen pickled grapes. I've seen pickled walnuts. All sorts of things were getting pickled. And I've actually, at a former site, when we were doing our fall into winter pickling, we were pickling beets, and we pickled apple with our beets to sweeten them a little bit.
Oh, nice. So Laura, I'm looking at how you're peeling your apple, and I noticed you're moving the knife away from you, which is obviously good, safe technique if you're cooking at home. But also the apples, if you have a vegetable peeler, this is a great task for kids to help you with if you're cooking this recipe with kids. Get them to help you peel the apples. You may remember from the recipe that it indicated that you could take out the cores and then cut them in slices. I've used my vegetable peeler to press into around the core of the apple, and that's something that kids could do as well if you don't have an apple corer at home.
And I meant to bring my corer today, and I did not. So I'm going to be doing the second technique. So we've got the core it and then cut it into thin rings technique, or we have the cut it into slices technique. And so I'm going to be doing that one today.
Right. And we didn't mention, sorry, I should back up, Laura. We didn't mention the one of the other recipes that we were looking at called for coring, cutting it and then coring it and using the quarters to make your fritters, which, depending on the tools that you have and depending on how fancy you want to be, do it whatever way pleases you. The recipe that we're using today is one that was available to people like the Masons, but perhaps not as available to someone like Thomas Halbert, who was a tenant farmer on the Masons' property, who had almost certainly had apples. He was actually required by the tenant agreement. How many apple trees was it, Laura? Was it 200 winter apple trees?
But also he was required to grow 800 peach trees. And it wasn't just setting them up to grow, he was required to maintain them, and that if any of them died, he had to plant and maintain new ones.
Right.
But this was directly in the agreement that he had with George Mason that he made in 1752.
So 200 apple trees produces a lot of apples, and they were cooking with them, probably making vinegar, making brandy, all sorts of things to use them up over the course of the winter. And a recipe like this one is something that they probably had access to.
So I'm going to pause for a second here and show you how I'm cutting mine quite thin. So at this point, this is an 1/8. These are 1/16ths. And so with the 16ths, you can see they are nice.
Back it up just a little bit so the camera will focus, Laura. There we go.
Just realized that. So compared to the 1/8 here, here's an 1/8. Here are the 16ths. And so we want to make sure that they're cooked, they cook all the way through. So making them thinner like this is a great idea. And that's why when the recipe that calls for coring it and then cutting it into rings, they say cut it into thin rings. We don't want to end up with gross uncooked apple in the middle of our delicious fritter. And so when you're cutting these 16ths, be careful, of your fingers. This is a good idea for adults to do this part, since it can be a little bit more tricky. So, but luckily not too hard. And so as you can see, like I said, these nice thin pieces. If you get one that's a bit chunky, you can always cut it again to try to get it to match better. So you'll see me, I cut in half, and then I cut in half again. And that's the point at which I take out the core of my apple, because that's how I personally find it easiest when I am cutting apples and need to remove the core. But if you have your own technique, that is a-okay. Mine is not the hard and fast rule that everyone must follow. And it's sort of funny because you mentioned, Lacey, this idea of, having the recipe that the Masons, could expect their enslaved cooks to use for something the Masons are going to eat versus something Thomas Halbert as a working person, a tenant farmer is eating. And you mentioned earlier about the oranges and the expense of oranges.
Yeah. The Halberts almost certainly did not see oranges. Maybe lemons, maybe limes. Those were a little bit more widely available. They're grown in other places than just Seville, Spain. And we see them in punch recipes for people of all social economic statuses. Is that where you're going, Laura?
Absolutely, thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, you picked up perfectly what I put down.
Fantastic.
It's almost like we've been doing this a little while.
And it's also almost like, we love historic food too. These
All
are
right.
really, really amazing dishes, really tasty treats that we can make today.
So our apples are all cut up now. And so I am going to start on the batter part of our recipe. I'll pause for a second. Are we ready to move on to our batter part, or do our folks need?
Does anyone have any thoughts or questions at this point? Feel free to drop them in the chat, or now's a great time to unmute yourself and shout out loud if you have any process questions or thoughts.
And I'm going to go ahead and take care of my lemon now. So I'm actually cutting off my lemon rind. And like we said earlier, this is great if you have a zester where you can just fancily do the zesting, or if you have a fruit peeler, you can use that as well. Since I am without, I'm just using my same knife, and I'm just doing really shallow cuts to take off that outer layer.
And once you get that outer layer off, you're going to remove as much of the pith and slice that small, right, Laura?
Right. And so I'm trying to get there without cutting all the way through to the fruit, because I don't need the full fruit. So it smells amazing.
Oh, I'm sure it does. This is one of my favorite parts of adding lemon to things is you're getting, I can see you went deep there, Laura.
I did.
You can get the essential oil. So you get this beautiful fruity floral scent into the dish. And I love adding lemon zest to everything. When we make punch for our program, like Cocktails by Candlelight, I have to zest, 4 or 5 lemons, and just, sitting there zesting the lemons, mixing it with sugar. You just have this beautiful aroma rising up.
I especially love it in the wintertime because it always makes me reminds me of summer. So it's a big something that I enjoy. So, all right, well, there we go. Let me get my other knife out and chop that up a bit. I'm just gonna set lemon.
So we had some spots where I could see Laura has gotten a lot of pith. If you're doing it this way, I definitely recommend getting trying to get as little of the pith as possible. It can be a little bitter. Ooh, we've got a comment. It's making someone hungry, Laura.
Excellent.
Me too. I'm with you. I will not be able to eat these because sadly I am gluten-free, but I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh, why did I not make a gluten-free batch to bring to work today?
My knife is fighting a little bit with this lemon peel, but that's okay. Now, remember when we cut things, I just want to give a kitchen safety tip. Keep your fingers in. We don't want anyone accidentally getting themselves. So be careful as you cut up your lemon peel if that's the method that you are having to go through. In fact, I may have to switch knives here because this one's not quite chopping the way I need it to.
So clearly I need to bring my sharpener back in, Laura.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. It happens. Also, lemon peel is meant to be tough. It's meant to protect that fruit. So it is not the easiest thing to cut. So that's okay. So, all right. And I suppose if you did not have fresh lemon on hand, you could just use a little lemon juice. If you were at home, you could just put a little squeeze of lemon juice in just to get the flavor. So that's something to consider too as we make our modern substitutions. So because we want people to be able to make this at home in their own kitchen, and that's just how that goes. So okay, that's what I'm going to do for now. So all right, so now we will move on to the batter. So I'm going to swap places here. So my mixing bowl is closer. If you need any extra vision into my bowl, just let me know. So I listed out ingredients earlier, but I'll list them again as I put them in. So I'm going to start with my 1 cup of flour. I have got a 1/4 cup of powdered sugar. So not granulated sugar, we got powdered sugar here, which will help keep things nice and light and fluffy. And I like to just kind of a little bit. I have got
very technical mixing method there.
Absolutely. I've got my spices here, and I'm just going to do a teaspoon. So I'm just going to pinch it and eyeball it because I'm pretty good at that. But if you want to get out your spoons, also totally fine. So there we go. Now comes time for our egg. And as you can see, the batter here is fairly straightforward. I think the thing that takes the longest is actually getting all your ingredients together. So don't do what I did, which is have your flour go everywhere when the egg hits it.
Laura's over there washing her hands. What was flour like in the 18th century, Laura?
Oh my goodness, this is such a great question. And I actually used to work with a historic mill where we were making historic 18th century style flour and cornmeal. And the answer is it's actually more like your flour today than you might think. They had the ability to make everything from what we would consider sort of whole grain flour, where you're including the entire piece of wheat, all the way to really fine pastry grade flour. The catch is the price point. So for the average Virginian, someone who is a farmer and working, they are not going to be able to afford every day the super fine pastry grade flour. That requires extra working. It requires extra labor, so it's more expensive. I'm going to pause myself for 1 second. I'm going to add in my cup of heavy cream. So a lot of people are getting what we would consider, like a whole grain. It's not quite as expensive.
Nope. Yeah. Never mind. Go ahead. Continue.
And the same thing happens with cornmeal as well. And in the 18th century, they have the ability, just like we do today, their mills are designed to produce different quality grades of flour. And that's true for flour made from wheat, flour made from rye, things made from corn, all the different varieties. Was there a question?
Nope. I was just making sure you had your measuring cup handy.
I did. I pre-planned myself here. I did not have a full cup. I had a half cup though, so that's why you saw me do 2 of them. But it is indeed a 1 cup of cream. So I like to put that right in there. And so I'm going to do a little bit more mixing, and then I'm going to add my optional brandy. Now, the thing about adding in my optional brandy is it makes this wetter again. And so I actually have a little extra flour off screen. So if I decide that it is too wet and not thick enough, I can add a little bit more flour in to help everything be the right consistency. In fact, I'm definitely going to add a little bit more flour to this. I can already tell.
You definitely want it to be pretty thick. If it's too thin, it won't stick to the apple slices. So if you think it is too thick, and there Laura just added her brandy, her optional brandy. Again, if you're making this with kids and you want to leave that out, totally fine.
Oh, now it really does smell divine.
And you haven't added your lemon peel yet. It's gonna be amazing.
Not even yet. So yeah, all of these smells are coming together in a really wonderful way.
Can you tell Laura and I love food? We had a question in the chat. Could you do the recipe with gluten-free flour? Absolutely. I did my testing with gluten-free flour. Laura did her testing with regular flour. You may need you have to play with the flour a little bit. You may need a little more. You may need a little less. But I do recommend making it with a gum-free flour. So try not to get try to use a flour that doesn't have xanthan gum in it. If it has xanthan gum, it kind of activates and makes the dough too sticky. Even if it's not a super thick batter, it doesn't cooperate really well.
All right, so I'm getting mine there, and I'm going to kind of tilt a little bit, and I'm going to use my spoon so you can see. So this is still pretty loose. So I'm going to add a bit more flour, but I'm going to do it a little at a time because I want to be in control of things. So don't be afraid if you got to do it a little bit at a time. It's okay when you're cooking to think, I don't know exactly how much I need. That is one of the most fun parts of cooking I have found. Is experimenting a little bit, saying, nope, just a little bit more, just a little bit more, just a little bit more. Like even adding just that slight bit more flour, I can already feel the body of this batter really change.
Yeah, that looks perfect, Laura.
Yeah. I started stirring it up and I thought, there it is. So now when I pour it, you can see way more body. In fact, let me see if I can tilt it and hold it up. You'll see that it kind of does that ribbon effect.
That looks amazing.
That's what we're looking for. It's not quite peaking, but it's holding its shape for a moment before it kind of comes back into the full batter here. So I'm going to set this aside for a moment. I almost forgot my lemon peel.
I was going to say, what about the lemon peel?
That of me. And I've got really big chunks in here, but I kind of like the big chunks. So,
yeah, you can feel free if you're using a zester or a microplane and you get super, super fine, that is also perfect.
I am working with what I have today.
Yeah. Or if you want to leave the lemon peel out, also fine. The first batch I made, I was testing the density of the batter, and I didn't happen to have a lemon at home, but it came out really well.
And so, like I said, I kind of like the chunky bits. I love having a little bit more body to my lemon. So I'm okay with that. Oh, it smells so good.
I'm so jealous. I'm over here in the library and you're in the kitchen.
I know you can. I was going to say, and we have the doors closed, so it's not something you can smell from there. Okay, so now comes the fun part of frying time. So let me start to heat up my bit, and I've got my lard here. So we decided to go with lard for this today, but you could use lard or oil, like a vegetable oil, or you could even use butter to do your frying. What they all have in common is that they have fats in them, and so that is what we are looking for, is a kind of fat to do our cooking in. I'm going to hand this to you, Lacey, for a second while I do dabble with the lard.
Yeah, so Laura is while Laura is getting her recipe or her lard ready, I would say I personally don't choose butter. I think it has too low of a smoke point, so it makes it sorry, I apologize. Give me just 1 second. I'm having a slight technical issue.
Well, while she is dealing with that, so I turned my heat on, and I have my stovetop right now set at a 4, so it's on the lower end of medium. And my lard is already starting to just slide a little bit. So I want to make sure that these little chunks I've cut up into completely melt. I want to have a nice liquid that my fritters will sit in. I don't need it to be, a full bath for them, but I want it to be enough that they're not going to stick to the bottom of the pan, and that oil is going to help fry them completely.
I'm looking at your amount, Laura. I do think you probably need a little more.
I know. I was.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I couldn't see the other pieces you had in there. That's probably good.
I was gonna say, I don't want to go too whole hog here. Not to. Oh, of course. Yeah, unintentional puns here. Yeah, I have 4 little pieces in here. But yeah, they started to slide immediately, which is what we want. We want it to start to heat up. So I'm going to do it real gently, though. I don't want to burn my lard right off the bat, so don't turn it all the way up on high and throw your lard in there or your oil or anything else. We want it to come up a bit on the slow side, so that way we are in control of what's happening here. Now, safety notes while we're waiting for this to come up. This is something that adults should be handling. This is something hot. It can burn you if it splashes. I know from personal experience. And so you just want to be careful. So when we get to the part where we're going to do things like flip over our fritters, make sure you have a tool that you feel really well in control of it. Don't let things just splash in the pan. Otherwise, you can hurt yourself. So just be careful.
Yes, I also speak from personal experience in the joys of oil burns. They are not fun. So while your lard is heating up, Laura, Does anyone have any thoughts or questions at the moment? Anything you're
Let me put it.
curious
I
about?
have a virtual, but I'm
Yes,
not
ma'am.
very interested in it. Yeah.
Did I hear a question forming?
Oh, it starts March 22nd. All right, so we have time.
So one thing I'll say is, it's sort of funny because, you mentioned how, butter's not your thing, but, we're using lard today, and historically lard was really popular. And there's a great reason is that hogs were a really popular source of meat in the 18th century. For a lot of farmers, they did not keep their hogs penned up. They were allowed to roam their property for a large part of the year, and you only brought them in at time when it was ready to butcher them. And that's because they could feed themselves. So you're not having to pay as much out of your own pocket to feed these hogs. But when you do butcher these hogs, you want to use as much of that animal as you can. And so lard is the rendered down fat from those hogs. And of course, you can get things like beef tallow as well, which is another form of fat from beef, from cows. But because hogs were so popular, actually, I am going to put just a little bit more in there. But because hogs were so popular, you find lard in so many recipes. They are the go-to.
It was a very convenient way to use all parts of the animal when slaughtering in the fall is preserving the lard and retaining it for future use.
So I'm going to turn my heat up just a smidge, but I am starting some tiny little bubbles, but only in one spot. So that's why I'm going to heat up a little bit more. I've also got a bald patch in the middle of my pan because, as we all know, sometimes pans aren't completely flat. So that's why I'm adding a bit more lard, is to make sure that I don't end up with a spot where my fritters are accidentally sticking and burning. So. But I'm going to just kind of, you can see the liquid moving around in the bottom there, hopefully.
Yep. Yeah, we can definitely see that.
Cool. So what we want to do is bring this up so that way we do not want a roaring boil with our lard. That is not what we want to go for. We want to see some bubbles. We want to know that it's hot, but we don't need this to be action film, happening in our pan. So.
Well, I'm starting to see some good shimmer on there too. You can see the way the fat moves in the center of the pan. That's another good indicator that it's hot enough. So I bet you could start battering your apples.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna have to keep, for my own knowledge, I do have a high point in the top bit of my pan, so I'm probably gonna put my things around closer to the edge rather than right in the middle. So just keep an eye on your own pan at home, because everyone's has different shapes to it. So, all right, so I've got my pile of apples, I've got my batter, and so we are going to coat our delicious apple pieces in the batter. This is a great time to get dirty.
I used a fork.
I was going to say
that out there, Laura.
Actually,
use whatever you enjoy. This is a great activity for kids to help you out with. We do recommend, unless your kids have really solid cooking skills, that you be the one to add the apple slices to the hot pan. But this is absolutely something that kids love doing, speaking from personal experience. They might make it a little bit of a mess, so also manage your tolerance level.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, I can see that nice sizzle. I can't hear it yet, but it looks fantastic.
So I'm using tongs, as you can see, because I realized, yeah, that's a good way to do this. So you can use that. I'm just making sure I cover the whole apple in batter first. And when we put our apple slices in, we do not want to crowd our pan. If we crowd our pan, things won't cook as well. It'll cool off the oils significantly, because our apples are not the same temperature. They're on the cool side. And so I'm giving them lots of space, and they're going to cook about 2 minutes on this side, and then we will flip them over and cook them another 2 minutes on the other side.
And they should be a nice golden brown on both sides. nice little crisp to them, which if you save them for later will fade off, they'll soften. But if you want to revive that crisp, pop them in a toaster oven or in your conventional oven to heat them back up, and you can get that crisp back.
So my technique here is I kind of give a little twist when I put them in, because that coats my whole apple, but it also makes sure I'm not dragging a whole bunch of extra batter with me. I think I'll put in one more for now.
I'm hearing the sizzle. I'm hearing the oil. So it's got that nice sizzly sound. You should hear that pretty much immediately at home when you drop the apples in.
Which I definitely did. I know.
Yeah, we're having a little, it's not quite close enough to camera to get that great sizzle going on immediately.
All right, so I'm just gonna let them sit for a minute. I can actually cover some other apples if I want to prep for my next batch. Now, when we take them out, I'm gonna get a plate and we're gonna rest them on a plate with a paper towel or a clean dish towel, and that helps kind of pull away some of the excess oil, so that way you're not getting something that's super greasy to eat.
Mm-hmm. While you're doing that, Laura, does anyone have any thoughts or questions? Feel free to pop them in the chat, or now is a great time to shout them out loud.
All right, mine, I believe, are ready for cooking, and I'm gonna grab a clean.
Oh, yeah. That looks glorious.
And of course, I gotta remember what order I did these in. So
yeah, that one.
Yeah,
that one's not quite done. It might need a little time on the side again.
Right, and you gotta have to remember when you put them in, there's a gap between actually placing them in the pan, but that's okay. We can always flip it over and give it a little extra time. So this is definitely a recipe about patience.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm thinking about all the other fritter recipes that are out there. Laura, can you think of what other kinds of fritter recipes you've seen in 18th century cookbooks?
Well, we actually did pumpkin fritters.
That's right. Oh my gosh, I forgot.
Yeah, which I thought was delicious. I really enjoyed that one. So it is kind of funny, you know, we do so many recipes, but yeah, I've seen apple fritters. I have seen other ones with fruit included in them. I have seen ones that call for corn. So instead of using flour, which is more expensive in the 18th century, you could just use cornmeal. And that's something that would have been more available to, you know, farmers who are not well-to-do. It would have been available to enslaved people who are getting cornmeal as part of their ration. So cornmeal is something that everyone is eating.
Also a predecessor to the hush puppy.
Yes. Oops, this one got burnt a little bit.
But that's a little overdone. I think your other one over there is looking a little hot too.
Yeah, a part of it is the center of the pan has less oil, so or less lard, so it's cooking faster. And this is why I said to everyone, I'm going to avoid this middle part of my pan, and that's a perfect representation of why.
Yeah, you could add some more lard too.
Yeah, I'm thinking I will.
Get that fat overheating in the middle.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm thinking about kinds of fritters. I've seen strawberry fritters, which I don't know how I feel about that. It's a fascinating way to treat strawberries, and it might actually be a good way to use strawberries that are just a smidge off. They're not rotten, but they're not beautiful anymore. But I don't know how I feel about a cooked battered strawberry.
You know someone who could run me some paper towel, Lacey?
Ah, yes, I will be back. I will be with you presently.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
So I'm taking these guys out because we've determined they are indeed like this one. Ah, yeah, this one's my best one. I'll hold this one up for examination by the audience. So you can see this one's got this nice golden texture. This one's not quite so speckled, but still really nicely done. Same thing with this one. It's got that nice golden color that tells us it is cooked the way that we want it to. So, and if you want to, you could always take a fork and kind of poke it a little bit, see if it's the way that you want it to be. The answer is yes. So I am putting them on a plate off to the side. And here's Lacey's brought me my paper towel because I neglected to grab that when I started. So thank you, Lacey.
My pleasure.
And then I've got,
There you go.
thank you so much. Dump them on the same towel. And then when you do these, you can, if you have more than will fit on a single layer of your plate, you can always put another layer of paper towel down. So that's one round of them. And so we'll just keep going. So however many apples you have, you can do a big batch of this. You can double it. You could also make a smaller batch if you're like, I just have one apple, but I want to indulge and enjoy myself. You could do that. This is a flexible recipe. So, and I waited for, I was going to say, when Lacey gets back in.
I'm back.
Awesome. I was going to say, I'm actually pretty sure I have had strawberry fritters because in Pungo, Virginia Beach, they have a strawberry festival every year.
Interesting.
And they have all kinds of strawberry things. And so I'm actually pretty sure I've had some variation of that at that festival. So shout out to my grandmother and my aunt who are visiting, who are from down there. The reason that I know about that. So, but yeah, there's a lot of different fritters. Oh, I know one fritter that was one I tried that was a failure for me, which was zucchini fritters.
Oh yeah,
I tried it and I don't know if it was the recipe, just wasn't it was not a great recipe. It did not have a lot of success, which bummed me out because I had seen it all over the place. But alas, not to be.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would like a historic zucchini fritter. I personally don't love zucchini. But I have come across a modern fritter recipe which has zucchini, carrots, and chicken in it.
Ooh.
Yeah, they're really fascinating and they're really tasty. They're not battered like these. They're more like if you've ever had a brown Betty, where you grate apple and put some egg and some flour in it just to hold it together, and then fry it just the same as we're doing these today. And this particular recipe also has curry in it. So it's just this really awesome melding of flavors. But you could see part of the reason I bring it up, other than the fact that, yes, zucchini fritters can be successful. Yeah, is that the fritter has persisted both in the way that we're thinking about it here today and in this historic context. What it is has changed a little bit, how people make it, but they are, this is a kind of recipe that has persisted to today, and I think that's really awesome and really amazing.
We do. It's so funny when we are looking for recipes to share with you all as part of this program. You know, we always have the back and forth with ourselves of wanting to pick things that are somewhat familiar to you, that you may be used to eating, a descendant of that recipe. And then sometimes we want to pick really weird recipes out.
Which we did for next week.
Yeah, next week is our weird one. Whoops, I got a little bit.
Next week we're making chicken pudding, which isn't sweet. So pause your brain right there. I tell my mom, yeah, we're making chicken pudding. And she's like, you have to stop saying that. So I'm like, I'm making the chicken dish, and she knows what I'm talking about. But in any case, it sounds weird, but the actual recipe itself is almost like a pancake around chicken, and not like a more savory pancake around chicken. So if you like chicken and waffles, this might be your thing. And you bake it. So it's a really interesting dish, but it has a really odd name. I really enjoy it. So we are definitely making this recipe gluten-free next week so that I can eat it. Yeah, it's a fun one, and it's our weird one for this session of History in the Kitchen.
Yeah, and like we said, fritters are sort of funny. It's something where we have ones that we are familiar with today, apple fritters, and then we get some really odd ones that pop up in historic cookbooks. But I find it very fun. Well, that can happen. So my apple just like popped out of its coating. So So
you squish the apple out of the interior.
yeah, I did.
This is this is one of the challenges in getting your batter just right. If it's too thick, it can pop just like that. Well, I'm also looking at the time. So we still, as you can see, have some apple fritters to fry, and we would love to keep you with us if you are interested in staying, but this does conclude the formal part of the program today. So we want to say thank you for joining us again. As you can probably tell, this is something that Laura and I love doing. And it's made possible by your support. The more you continue to join us, the more that we are able to do them. And if you consider a financial donation to support Gunston Hall, it helps us be able to do the research that puts on these programs that allow us to bring these things to you. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.